The Lord keeps faith forever, secures justice for the oppressed, gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets captives free. God notices things, and God promises to set things right. When I think about that, usually I am consoled and comforted. I like knowing that God cares and that God in Jesus brings salvation to those who await him. But there are other days when I am hoping that God has better things to do than to keep an eye on me. I feel more than a little awkward when I hear Jesus say things like, "Beware those who go around in long robes and accept seats of honor." I assure you that the irony is not lost on me, that I am one of the few people here who is wearing a long robe, and that I have what is probably the best reserved seat in the church. So I recognize that in noticing what God notices, there may be an invitation to modify the way I live, to live in a way that is more consistent with what God values and notices. God notices faithfulness and generosity. God especially notices faithfulness and generosity among those whom the world often overlooks. In the reading from the first book of Kings, we hear about the prophet Elijah. Elijah might have looked to any number of people for help, but he turns to the widow of Zarephath, not only because he recognizes in her faithfulness and generosity, but also because he knows that the Lord keeps faith forever, secures justice for the oppressed, gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets captives free. The widow shares the little that she and her son possess. For the widow, faith overcomes fear. Generosity overcomes self-concern. We rejoice that God blessed her faithfulness and her generosity abundantly. But I hope we also recognize that the widow shared the little she had without any sense of expectation for reward. In our gospel reading from Mark, we hear about Jesus sitting across from the treasury of the temple. Jesus notices many people making their contributions, but he singles out the one person that everyone else overlooked. The poor widow, limited in means but outstanding in faithfulness and generosity, contributes all that she has. Hers is not the gift that will pay the light bill or ensure that the windows get washed, but hers is the gift that most closely matches the faithfulness and generosity of God that is referred to in the letter to the Hebrews. Like Jesus, the poor widow sacrificed all that she had, her whole livelihood. In noticing the poor widow, we are meant to recall that Jesus willingly gave everything, surrendering to death on a cross that we might be saved. We do not hear if the poor widow of the gospel receives any reward, as did the widow of Zarephath. But we know that God noticed her faithfulness and her generosity, even though we seldom do. As faithful and as generous as we may think ourselves to be, few of us rise to the level of the poor widow. For most of us, our faith is encompassed in our fear. Our generosity resides within the narrow bounds of our desire for security. The widow's gift simultaneously inspires us and shames us. But the widow's gift should not inspire us or shame us into putting more into the collection today. That was not the intent of Jesus. Jesus' intent is for us to notice the faithfulness and the generosity of those around us, to focus on the sacrifices of others rather than being self-satisfied with our meager gifts. And in noticing the widows around us, we might also notice the faithfulness and the generosity of God. Perhaps in noticing the generosity of God, we might be called to greater generosity ourselves, not out of shame, but out of love. We might even be called to pray as St. Ignatius of Loyola did. Lord, teach me to be generous. Teach me to serve you as you deserve, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to labor and not to seek to rest, to give and not to ask for reward, save that of knowing that I do your will. Let us pray that we may notice and perhaps emulate in some small way the generosity of God. The Lord keeps faith forever, secures justice for the oppressed, gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets captives free.